Okay, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and get started. So, hello everyone. For those of you who don't know, my name is Autumn Sipis. I am the project coordinator with the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. And on behalf of the coalition and RETScreen, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, RETScreen and the Virtual Energy Analyzer, Real Properties. And just quick, before we start today, I just want to acknowledge with respect the Indigenous peoples and communities whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day and on whose traditional territory our work takes place. Throughout the webinar, please use the chat function for any technical issues you may be experiencing and use the Q&A function for any questions you have regarding the presentation. Stephen will try to answer questions throughout the webinar today, and if we don't get to them during the webinar, we will answer them at the end. We are recording this webinar. The recording will be sent to all registrants and will be available on our website and YouTube channel at a later time. So today we have Stephen Dixon of No Energy and Kate Butler, Executive Director of Energy Management at Service New Brunswick. Stephen has over 40 years of energy management service experience in a diverse range of industrial, commercial, institutional, and utility organizations, and we are very excited to have him here today. Take it away, Stephen.
Great, thank you very much there, Autumn. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to folks in healthcare today, and so that's a big long title there, but the key thing is the focus on healthcare. I'm really excited about something that we've been able to arrange. Kate Butler from Service New Brunswick is going to come in and talk about how they use RETScreen as part of what they're doing down there in New Brunswick within, well, both schools and hospitals, but focusing on healthcare. In fact, one aspect of RETScreen, which I think is particularly valuable, called performance analysis, which isn't actually in the title, but it is part of what I'm going to present here today. So really excited about what she's going to tell you and how they actually use it, because I think it really epitomizes, the value, or really demonstrates the value of RETScreen Expert, at least one aspect of it. And I'm going to show you some of the other aspects too. So if you haven't heard of RETScreen before, it is a pretty all-in-one type of project management tool, decision support tool. And you'll see that today, there'll be a lot of places where I'm saying we make a decision about doing this or that. So it's there to help you make the right decision on energy, and today, low carbon, obviously, sustainability. It's available in many, many languages, 38, I think, at last count, covering 2/3 of the world population. RETScreen has been developed by Natural Resources Canada, CanMet Energy, a division of Natural Resources Canada. They have offices just east of Montreal, but overall they have folks, quite a few folks involved with their operations situated across the country for that matter. CanMet, or Natural Resources Canada, for RETScreen gets its funding from both our federal government, but also from many other agencies listed here today. So it's a real collaboration of agencies to support this, but also the developers, people like me. I've been involved in development over the years. Full transparency, I've contributed bits and pieces. Actually, performance analysis is one area that I've been particularly strong on. And there's probably hundreds of people like me that have contributed to RETScreen. One of the folks at RETScreen who works there you might run into is in charge of capacity building there. It's Kevin Burke, as often will say, even he and I and others who's contributed don't know all of RETScreen. There's parts that we've never touched because we weren't involved with those things. So it's such a massive but very rich tool for supporting energy efficiency work across many, many types of organizations today, focusing obviously on healthcare. So I'm going to focus a little bit this morning on one function of RETScreen called the Virtual Energy Analyzer, because it's a great way to get started in what you could do in a building, right? Whether you want to reduce energy or you want to take it to low carbon. And I'll actually come in right at the end and talk about how, as part of building, say, a collection of buildings, we call that a portfolio, how there is a new tool called the Net Zero Planner within, which utilizes what we call the Virtual Energy Analyzer archetypes in RETScreen. So all that's a bunch of words right now. Hopefully I'll try to lay that out for you. But basically there's a tool to get you started. There's a tool to work through things like benchmarking, feasibility analysis, what if I change this to that, performance analysis, where I track the performance of what we're doing. This is where Kate's going to come in and talk about how they're using across their portfolio buildings, we'll actually see on the screen her portfolio. She'll drill down into one building. She'll look at performance analysis, and she'll tell us or lead us through understanding how they actually use it to manage projects that they're doing, but also to provide motivation to their staff, right? So to engage the staff in the process, allow the staff to see the benefits of what they're contributing to. So I think that's really important. And she'll explain to you how they're approaching strategically energy management in their organization. As I said before, the portfolio, if you have more than one building, collection of buildings, it could be just a portfolio of projects within a building too. So there's many ways to use that portfolio piece. You can use basically RETScreen to do project types, everything listed on the screen. I'm not going to read all these things. You can read these later. You'll get a copy of the slides. You'll see the recording. But you can even use it to decide whether you're going to. Somebody said to me the other day, I've got a used car for sale. It's a hybrid, and so I sat down with RETScreen, the used car in as the proposed case. I put in my existing used cars as the base case, and I evaluated whether it made sense from a fuel efficiency perspective. It took me 5 minutes in the transportation model of RETScreen to decide or not whether to buy this other car from a fuel efficiency perspective. You can use it for many things like that. RETScreen has embedded databases. So if I'm sitting there thinking, oh, I want to change, I want to put this photovoltaic system on the roof of this small clinic over here, and I wonder what it would cost to put those particular panels on. Do I have to call a supplier? No, I can click a button. It's a little shopping, the little shopping cart here at the top here, and it actually has information about products that I may put on there. And the dollar sign, I click another button, it gives me an idea of what the rough installed cost might be for that particular item that I chose. So I can actually begin to do a complete project, analyze a complete project with never even leaving my desk. Now, does that mean that's all you have to do? No, but you can refine those numbers going forward. Depending on where you are in the world, you may need weather and climate data. RETScreen has a ton of that. Weather data is what's happening today, tomorrow, and yesterday, and further back in the past. Climate data is what's the long-term averages, and they're used differently in RETScreen. I'll point that out. If you happen to be into water power, there is a hydrology database. There's lots of project data. And this is what I'm going to focus a bit on this morning, the idea of archetypes. Archetype definition is a very typical thing. So building archetypes, very typical building templates that RETScreen has built, and they can be used in many, many situations. So we'll explore those. Benchmark data, how well am I doing and how do I compare to others? And benchmarking is something you can do with RETScreen for sure. It's something that many of you probably already do, maybe do with something like Portfolio Manager. And in fact, that's exactly what Efficiency or Service New Brunswick do. They actually have data in Portfolio Manager, data in RETScreen, and they migrate between the two on an ongoing basis. They use the two side by side. Kate will show you how their portfolio builds up. I'll show you how to get the data from Portfolio Manager into RETScreen. It's quite a suite of products, right? Both tools are available through Natural Resources Canada. They both serve a very unique function, right? So benchmarking, monitoring, feasibility analysis, all those things. So the interface to RETScreen is pretty, I'm going to say, overwhelming to begin with. Because Kate's going to jump into RETScreen a little bit. So I see there's something in the chat there already. So okay, that's just Autumn saying welcome, thank you. So RETScreen has a lot of things going on right in the center of the interface, and I'm actually going to actually open up the software here, and Kate will be looking at the software too. But so on the interface in RETScreen, you get a bunch of things, but right in the center is this big wheel, which actually speaks to many of the functions and how they integrate together. The only one that really isn't shown on this is the portfolio function, which is where we bring multiple buildings together. But for any given building, we can benchmark that building, right? We can, look at where the building is and how it performs energy intensity, kilowatt hours per square foot, kilowatt hours per square meter, however we want to benchmark that. Then we can move into feasibility, where we say, what if I change this to that? How much energy is it going to save? What's the cost reduction? What's the emission reduction? Right? How can I finance that? I can build a business case for that. What's the net present value of that project I just did? And eventually, if it's a big enough project, maybe we need to do a risk analysis. RETScreen has these powerful risk and sensitivity tools as well. I won't spend a lot of time on the details of some of those tools, but nevertheless, they are there and they're very powerful. We'll spend a bit more time on what we call performance. So once we've done something, or even if we haven't done anything, it's always good to monitor. But once we've done something, and Kate's done a lot down there in New Brunswick in the healthcare buildings down there, then we'll be able to look at the performance by taking the data, analyzing it, and reporting that out. And I'm going to leave the rest of that to Kate. So that's the performance piece, right? And really, that just takes us back to the beginning where we can continue to, as they say, sharpen the saw or continually improve. So RETScreen supports this whole process of doing energy management in a continual improvement process in that way. There's some standard things in top menu you can access. There's, the standard things you might find in software. Over here on the right-hand side, there's help, right? We call integrated features. So we can either, the RETScreen YouTube e-learning channel. I can jump to that directly from here. So this comes up nicely. And you get to go there and you'll be able to see some videos of me talking about how to use RETScreen amongst other people. Later on, I'm going to point out that the net zero planning, so planning in a facility or a portfolio of facilities to get to net zero carbon. Well, you want to know how to do that? I'm going to give you 3 slides on it, maybe not even 3, maybe 2 slides today. Kevin Burke from RETScreen spends about an hour and a half, and there's actually, I think it's available in 3 languages now, on that particular topic in the new version of RETScreen 9.1, the net zero planning tool. So that's the YouTube e-learning channel. Embedded within RETScreen too, there's places where there's video links, right? So if you're looking at, okay, how to change and how to put a variable speed drive on a pump and go, I wonder what Steve would do, or I wonder how the expert would use this. You can click the video link and actually pull up a 3 or 4 minute video of how to use that module of the program. So there's lots of embedded help, there's textual help, and there's also manuals online as well. There's many different types of facility type examples, but what I'm going to focus more on today is what we call the virtual energy analyzer. I'm going to kind of introduce it with a few slides, then I'm going to jump in and just show you how easy it is to get there. Somebody said to me in a RETScreen training session this week, they said, well, what would you do? How would you analyze a particular situation of a steam trap in a hospital? And I said, So I started to think about how I would use RETScreen to do that. And I said, you know what? Let's go look at the virtual energy analyzer, because not just building types, right? But it also has project types. So I could go in there and say steam trap maintenance program. And bingo, there was how you would use RETScreen for a steam trap maintenance program. Big thing, right? In facilities like healthcare organizations or hospitals that use a lot of steam. All right, let's go back to my slide for a few minutes. There are learning resources built in. There is a whole series of case studies and templates, which not only have sort of a RETScreen file which represents the situation that's being analyzed, right? But it also has a description that goes along with that. You can actually teach yourself how to use RETScreen using the case studies and templates, because many of them are set up as assignments. And you go through and you work on the assignment, then you go and find the answer. Some of them, if you're into training other people to do stuff, actually even are set up even more from a teacher's perspective. But as a student, as a learner of things, you'll find them very easy to follow. So there's lots of built-in learning resources. RETScreen also has, as I said, this video help, right? So that if I'm in a screen, actually this is the one on pumps that I talked about earlier, and I'm wondering, what does it mean by the capacity of the motor? Well, because RETScreen exists in 38 languages, sometimes the words in English aren't what we normally size. Normally I might size the size of the motor, right? But capacity is a more generic word, which can translate to 28 languages. So I'm confused about what capacity means. I roll over the descriptor, and I get to see what that actually means. And it actually has some links within that to drill down. Or maybe I want to see how the experts would use this particular module on putting a variable speed drive in a pump. I can click on the e-learning and I go directly to that particular, I think that's a 3-minute video on the e-learning channel, RETScreen's e-learning channel on YouTube. So very easy to get to help when you need it. Actually, one thing I'm going to say is, and I'll say this at the end, after this session, 2 organizations will have an opportunity to maybe get some coaching and support through how they would use RETScreen. But at the end of the day, my email address will be on the last slide. If you have a quick question about how to get going in this, I'm always happy to do that. But we do have a little bit of a prize here today, or a little bit of a opportunity for a couple of the organizations. Well, I think Autumn will talk about it. We'll have a draw, right? So if you indicate on the evaluation that you'd like to be entered in the draw for some coaching and support, then we'll make sure a couple of organizations get access to that. And that would be me or someone on my staff. All right, getting started, right? The virtual energy analyzer. What I tell people, if you're opening up and you don't know where to start, now the first thing you need to do, well, you can download the existing program. You can download what we call the viewer version from the website, www.retscreen.net. I think I have that on a later slide. You can download it and use it. Now, some of the features are not available in the viewer version. You won't be able to save. Well, what are you going to do? You want to try this out for real after this workshop? Guess what? You're going to get a 30-day license after this workshop to go in and do that. And if you've never used it before, what I always tell people is go look at the virtual energy analyzer, because in there you'll be able to see a hospital, right? You'll be able to see a clinic, right? You'll be able to see a clinic that they're reducing the consumption of energy by 30 to 40%. Or maybe it's a hospital where they're going to take it right down to 90% reduction. What's it going to take? How are we going to change the systems to be able to do that? How do we change the heating equipment and so on? That's all going to be detailed in that model. So these are great examples of what can be done. Now, does that mean you have to do all these things? No, right? You can build your own model, you can build your own plan, and that's part of what we call the net zero planning tool. But at the end of the day, you've got access to a lot of, I guess, folks like myself who've built these things. Like there's literally hundreds of facility archetypes, different types of facilities or measures. One that I could have put on this slide. I think this one's about ventilation control, heat recovery, and ventilation. But there could be one on steam traps. I'll actually show you that, how we get to that one in the virtual energy analyzer. All right. Let's take a tour of of a couple of the archetypes. I'm definitely going to show you the hospital inpatient 40% energy archetype and the clinic outpatient 80 to 90% archetype. And if anybody wants to, ask a question, could RETScreen analyze this situation? Put it in the Q&A and I'll see whether we can find that in the archetypes. So let's jump over there right now. All right. So after the workshop, you're going to give this a try. So you download RETScreen. You basically install your 30-day license. There's a couple ways to do that. You can just go over here to the subscribe, and down the bottom here it says add a software key. So Autumn will email you a software key. You can just load it in here, or the other way I like to do it is just stick the software key on my desktop, double click it, opens up RETScreen, says you're now licensed for 30 days, right? So one way or the other, you're going to get to this interface. And my suggestion is, the first time through, click on the virtual energy analyzer. All right, so because many of the measures depend on the conditions outside, right? Temperatures, wind speeds, sunshine, all that kind of stuff. We can actually have RETScreen set up these samples that we're going to look at, these archetypes, at a particular location. So I can, Autumn, you're out in the west part of the country. So I'm going to go and take my my location pin here, and I'm going to stick it down. I'm not sure exactly where you're at. I don't need to precisely know, but I'm going to go and say, okay, maybe you're out in Coquitlam, right? So there we go, Coquitlam, BC. So that's where it's going to build this project I'm asked to build. Now, what kind of project or what kind of archetype am I going to look at? I go up here and I can pick on commercial institutional. And sometimes you kind of have to search through these things because even me, I go into them a lot. I sometimes think, is it there or here? So there's 3 different categories here. So you kind of have to play with a little bit. And I can go down here and I can pull up healthcare because that is our focus today. All right. So now it says description, clinic outpatient. But if I click that, now I see I can look at a clinic or outpatient building, and I can look at an archetype that's being built to hit 30 to 40% energy reduction, or maybe a hospital inpatient, acute care hospital, 30 to 40% energy. Or maybe I'm going to look at an archetype that looks at emission reductions by 80 to 90%. Now, the reason there's a range on these, because depending on where we are in the country, a particular configuration of building will perform differently depending on the amount of carbon in the electricity mix and the fuels that you select as well. So there's a bit of a range, but the 80 to 90% ones are pretty aggressive in terms of their carbon reduction. So let's take a look at a hospital inpatient, 30 to 40%. So I selected that. Now, you might be saying, Steve, what are these stars at the top here? Well, as they built the library of archetypes over the years, to begin with, they were pretty basic archetypes, and then they fleshed them out and added more and more detail and so on. So eventually they got to the point where they were very rich archetypes, and they call those 5-star archetypes. And there's probably still a few of the less rich ones. They're still useful, they just don't have as much information in them. So that star rating system gives you an idea of whether this is a 1 or a 5-star or somewhere in between. I'm pretty sure most of the ones that are in the virtual energy analyzer, or sorry, in the high carbon reduction are pretty much all 5-star archetypes. All right. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So what do I do here? Well, I just click the little arrow down the bottom and say, go ahead, and it says calculate. It's going to build me an archetype. It's going to build me a building at that location, right, of that particular type. Now, in this case, it's gonna make a few decisions for me. When I get to the 80 to 90% carbon reduction archetype, it's actually going to go through a bunch of logic, which looks at some criteria, looks at, whether I use ground source heat pumps or electric boilers, air source heat pumps, how much PV I put on the roof of the building, all that kind of stuff. Now it's interesting. I spent all week online with Teams, which I really have struggled sometimes with Microsoft Teams, right? And using it. I love Zoom, but for some reason, um, my computer runs slower when it's running Zoom and RETScreen. So anyway, you can't always get what you want, right? All right, so RETScreen has gone and got this building ready. This is the climate data. This is the long-term average data it's going to use to do the calculations where it needs outside conditions, right? And we go over to facility. Here we see a bit of information about the facility. There's a sample picture. Now, if you wanted to make this archetype look like your building, there's a couple things you can do. One thing you can actually do is to change the picture, right? So RETScreen is very customizable throughout various different aspects. So you can put pictures in. Maybe as you're working with this archetype, you want to make some notes about how this building differs from yours. So you can actually have notes in here. So throughout RETScreen, there's lots of places to put your own input in, whether you're building a building from scratch or whether you're actually just using one of the archetypes. And there we go. Okay. So the basic information here is what we call benchmarking information, right? So we put in our floor area, and then basically we have what we call our base case, the way it is now, energy consumption, and our proposed case energy consumption, and then we look at our targets with respect to that. So the benchmark for this kind of facility would be 545 kilowatt hours per meter squared. Now, if you go, well, what is that in square foot? I can just go up here and change this specify to square foot, and that's 50.6 kilowatt hours per square foot. Right. So I remember a hospital years ago I was working with that's where they ended up after 3 years of work. So, things are always improving. The range, is 19 to 64. That's a pretty wide range. The typical number in the center of the range is about 50.6. So RETScreen is actually very good at dealing with units. You can mix and match units as you go. The other thing you can do is you can actually scale these archetypes to your building size, right? So you can go in here and you can, in fact, click a button here, and RETScreen will give you the ability to adjust this building to your size of building, and it'll adjust all the numbers underneath. Pretty neat little tool. We're just going to leave it at the default size right now, but you do have that ability to scale your building, and you can scale it based on floor area or as a percentage. I want to be 50% bigger, something like that. All right. So that's the benchmarking piece. And RETScreen actually does allow you to benchmark oh, sorry, I hid the benchmarks there. RETScreen has two ways of benchmarking: overall energy consumption, or it allows you to benchmark on the basis of your kilowatt hours of electricity and your cubic meters of natural gas or whatever other fuel you use in that building. So you're not just stuck with natural gas. You can select many different fuels. It knows about the energy content of many fuels. So in fact, that's how we built what we talked about earlier, the level 1 benchmarking, which is the overall benchmarking. We didn't start with, this number of equivalent kilowatt hours. We could go in here and we can say, well, we use this much gas, this much electricity. We have a target of reducing those by this amount, and that will give us then the total energy consumption in the base case, the way it is today, the proposed case, after we do all the things in this archetype, the way it will be. Right. So in this case, the goal was to reduce by 32%. We'll see where they got to in this situation. So that's different levels of benchmarking, in addition to what you could or would otherwise be doing in Portfolio Manager as a companion tool. All right. So let's take a look now at the energy tab here, because this is where we see the details of the building, right? So this is an entire building, all the systems and equipment. Here we have the space heating, boilers, we have kitchen equipment, domestic hot water. Heating equipment converts fuel to energy that we can use in the building. Cooling equipment converts electricity, in most cases, to cooling resources that we can use in the building, right? We have a building envelope. We can specify what the building looks like from the outside. And you go, well, my hospital's a lot bigger. It's got so many different wings and sections and facings and facades and all that stuff. I couldn't fit that into one of these things. Not a problem. Because when you build your building in RETScreen, you can add as many building envelope elements as you want. I could simply go in here and add another one right now. So I can say, okay, I'm going to add another building envelope element, and that should go into my list here. If I go, there we go. It should come up there now. So I now have a blank building envelope element that I can use and specify for whatever else. Maybe I just want to put a roof in there. Maybe I just want to analyze the heat loss through the roof. I'm going to show you that, tell you a story about that one later on. So you can use the whole building envelope or just part of it, right? So very flexible tool when it comes to doing that. If I don't want that building envelope element, I'm going to simply remove that one to keep my file nice and neat, right? So we're going to move that one. There we go. Now, I'm going to go back to what we typically call the include screen, which is where we see everything that's included in the building. And here we go, right? Look at that building. I'm not going to go through all these things, but somebody has spent a lot of time, and this is based on real experience in doing audits and analyzing and working with these types of buildings. The lighting systems, all the electrical equipment, including like medical equipment, medical imaging, patient room equipment, kitchen equipment, it's all there. Hot water, so hot water for patient room cleaning, kitchen, washrooms, right? I don't think I see a laundry here, so I assume that maybe the laundry is contracted out in this particular example. So we've got pumps. So where are the pumps in the building? Cold water pumps, heating pumps, and so on. Fans, right? We've got elevator motors, we've got process heating, and so on. And all the way up to and including things like solar water heaters. Now, in this particular model, the solar water heater is turned off, as is the photovoltaic panel. In order to get to the 30 to 40% energy, we didn't need those things. But we'll see when we look at the low carbon archetype, we're probably going to need those things, so they'll end up being turned on. So that's, in a nutshell, an archetype. What we can see from this is we move across the top, the results, right? Here we see, right, a summary of the costs and the savings. Now, if you want to use RETScreen as a project management tool, under the costing feature here, you can actually enter a lot more information than just summary information, right? So we have a costing tool. We have a very detailed costing tool where we can go in and do some almost exhaustive project management and costing functions as well. Right. And it's not just first costs, it can deal with periodic costs going down the road, because ultimately, when we do our financial analysis, we have the ability to do basically present value analysis, which takes into account maybe there's some costs down the road that that we have to deal with. We have to refit some of these systems to keep them delivering the results that we're after. So we do have a nice financial calculator here, and I mentioned it before, a risk analyzer. So if you've got a big project and you want to look at the sensitivity of the net present value, which is the financial result that you're looking at, financial indicator, to say first cost, initial cost, O&M, or debt ratio, if you're borrowing some money, maybe it's part of a shared savings project, you can do that kind of analysis. You can also look at the likely outcomes of this project. This thing involves what's called a Monte Carlo simulation. It can do up to 5,000. Right now, it's only doing 500 iterations, but it does 5,000, could do 5,000 random iterations of the parameters we put in here and give us an idea of the likely outcome, right? Because nothing is ever precise in this world. So it deals with the uncertainty even and allows us to manage risk by understanding the uncertainty around what the project outcomes could be. And then eventually, if I move over to emissions, and I left that one to last, here we see the emission reduction. So even though I said this archetype was designed to get 30 to 40% energy reduction, it actually is set up to, what's present here at this location would yield a 40%, almost a 40% reduction in carbon. And you get to specify, or you'll see that as equivalences. So maybe you're not interested in cars, maybe you're interested in, how many acres or hectares of forest absorbing carbon. So this project is equivalent to 434 tons of CO2, which is almost 100 acres of forest absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. So some neat little tools like that. And it is sensitive to the amount of carbon in the grid in different parts of the country. Ooh, all of that. So that's the 30 to 40% energy archetype. Let's go back now, and we can simply go back to our home screen, and we can just jump over. And this time I'm going to have a look at the let's go to the clinic, the 80 to 90% reduction in carbon or emissions, clinic outpatient type of building. All right, we're going to leave it at the same location and hit go ahead. It says you made some changes, Stephen. What you had there, do you want to save those? No. RETScreen's really good at you not losing data. I honestly can say I've never lost data because of RETScreen. Now, if I answer that question incorrectly, that's my fault. And I have lost data that way, but it's not because the program was unstable or anything like that. And even if you turned your computer off in the middle of something, right? There's a feature, and I have it set to 5 minutes, that it saves automatically every 5 minutes, and it comes back up again. It says, hey, I found something you saved up to 5 minutes ago. And that saves things a lot. I've had one situation where it was on a desktop computer, the plug got kicked out, and boom, there was a problem. But RETScreen rescued me. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. So this is actually the archetype that it's going to be very aggressive, 80 to 90% reduction in emissions or carbon emissions, what I call low carbon. All right, so I'm going to jump over to the energy tab here quickly, and I'm going to scroll down the page because in each of these archetypes, in the energy tab, there is a descriptive field here, which is actually part of the notes section, which talks about how they constructed this particular archetype for this situation. It talks about the electrification of heating systems, right? And it does take into account the carbon in the grid, the location. So if we were to take this building from BC and put it in Alberta or Nova Scotia, where the carbon in the grid is a lot different, then it will make different decisions. So it responds to that and it makes decisions. So it determines whether we need to go with a boiler, an air source heat pump, or a ground source heat pump, right? So increasing efficiency, electric boiler is 100% efficient. The ground source heat pump, right, has a COP of say 2.5 on a seasonal basis. That's like a 250% efficiency. Maybe we can get 370% or a COP of 3.7 out of the ground source heat pump. And we might need to do that depending on where we are in order to get the carbon numbers down. All right, so I'm not going to read all this. It also tells us how it's going to integrate in rooftop and off rooftop PV as well. So this is not just a matter of somebody's, stored some information in a file, it opens it up, puts the weather to the weather. No, it's actually making some real concrete decisions, and you can read through those things. There's also, I believe, there's some documentation around about the actual logic, but most of the logic is actually described there. So make sure when you open up one of these, you check that section to understand how it's coming up with this archetype. This is very much similar to what we had before, but the difference here then is that here we're getting to 92.3% carbon reduction, which that's what we were going for, at least 80 to 90%. It does have the financial engine in it, but the one thing we'll notice here quickly is that in this case, to get to that low carbon in this particular circumstance, there isn't actually a simple payback. Okay, that's a long-term investment. We've got a 20-year time horizon. If we went longer, this thing would probably eventually break even. But right, if you're going to low carbon with the aggressive measures you have to do, it's definitely not something you can evaluate simple payback. But life cycle costing, which is essentially what this is the right way to look at that type of investment, and it is an investment in the future. There's little questions. What I want to do now is I want to jump quickly and just show you, and it's probably relevant to healthcare, definitely with steam. What if I want to justify steam traps, right? What if I want to justify steam traps? I'm going to go out here. I'm going to virtual energy analyzer. I'm going to click in to, in this case, individual measure, all right? So remember that, individual measure, because you can explore a bunch of measures. Okay, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to move my way down, and hopefully I'm going to find some steam here. So I have steam losses, right? That's what I'm going to go after, because a steam trap, if it's leaking, represents a steam loss. So there's steam losses. So now what I can do is, okay, steam traps repair. Well, let's see what this project looks like. So again, I'm going to put the project in Vancouver, although it's probably not relevant to this particular archetype. So let's see what this comes up with for me. All right, facility. So there's a picture of a steam trap, right? Under energy, we go into energy. We have the description here, right? And so we have two options here. Steam traps connected to condensate return, which doesn't represent an opportunity, or we have steam traps, or it might do. Let's just see. I'm going to turn the savings measure on. So in fact, yeah, the savings measure is different depending on whether we're returning condensate or not, because obviously the steam trap's leaking. Some of the steam that goes past it could eventually become condensate and be recovered back in the system. But when we're dumping the condensate and the steam trap's leaking basically to drain, then that's a complete loss. Now you'll notice here, we have options, and those options are selected by what they call the include measure function, and that exists in all of the archetypes. So maybe I don't want all the projects in those big long lists of archetypes in that clinic. I can turn off certain things that I don't want to see in that particular project. All right, so let's have a look at how it does this. So what this is is a steam leak, 7.5 millimeters, right? How big is that? Well, it's about what? It's about a quarter of an inch, right? So what is a quarter of an inch steam leak at, well, it says 15 bar. How many PSI is that? Is 202 PSIG, right? So, and we're talking about um, basically saturated steam, so not superheated steam. And the steam is leaking for 5,400 hours a year, right? So basically most of the heating season. So it tells us the amount of energy, but what's interesting here is when we go out here, that's worth, holy mackerel, $387,000. Wait a second, there must be more than, oh, there's 10 steam traps. So one steam trap leaking like that, right? We'll go back in here, go back here, is worth about $38,000. I always say that if there's something that's worth doing, it's worth putting numbers on it, right? Or maybe put numbers on something, it may be become visible that it's worth doing. So even something as simple as a steam trap or any kind of leak, there's many things you can evaluate in RETScreen. You can look at a whole facility, as I did, or you can look at a very specific measure. Right? I'll take a look at a few more specific measures in the next segment. Not seeing any questions there, so I think what I'll do is I'll just put RETScreen aside for a moment. So that was kind of looking at the archetypes. And again, I'm going to encourage you to think about that. The first time you look at RETScreen, explore it with the archetypes. The other thing you can do, if you're interested, and this is particularly interesting as well, is you can explore it using these case studies and templates down here. So at the top of this column, it's virtual energy analyzer. Those are the archetypes. Have a look at projects, buildings, whatever, or case studies and templates, right? So I can go in here, and let's say I was specifically interested in steam. Any template or case study, right, which is related to steam would come up here, right? So here we see, a number of those. May not be relevant to my situation. Well, here it is. Here's the template, process steam in a sterilizer. That is relevant to a hospital. Well, let's take a look at the template. So when we open that up, it talks about essentially that project. So if that project is something of interest to you, it looks like making some changes to the sterilizer, right, to improve its steam efficiency. So how does RETScreen analyze that? There you go. There's a project. So you can click on the blue thing to see the project, the descriptive piece. If you double click, it'll open up that project and show you the answer or the whole project. All right. So case studies and templates from the home page in RETScreen, if you click on home, are a good source of examples as well. All right. Move forward. I'm going to kind of go rapid fire here through a bunch of things because I want to make sure we have enough time at the end to let Kate talk about what they've done in the healthcare in New Brunswick. So if you're doing something as simple, and many people have done all these things, as doing a lighting retrofit, there's a nice little lighting analyzer. Not a zonal cavity calculator, which is a much more detailed lighting calculation, but it does allow you to take into account the light levels that you require and making sure that you don't modify that. It's interesting. I remember one gentleman who some of you probably know, JJ Knott, and he told me about what they discovered improving the paint that was used in patient rooms to reduce the ability of the paint. Changing the paint had one that had less propensity to harbor bacteria. He also discovered that actually had greater reflective properties. And so painting the room had the dual benefit of being able to reduce the amount of light you had to put in the room with the electricity. And now you had a better paint from a patient, like a medical perspective as well. So can't analyze that in RETScreen, but you could analyze that, you discover you need 16% less energy. You could do that. All right. Schedules and temperatures. I mean, and I work with a gentleman named Michel Perron, does lots of audits in hospitals and recommissioning of facilities and of any kind, including hospitals. And one of the things we still discovered today is there's still opportunities to work on those schedules and temperatures, right? Simple ways to eliminate unnecessary energy use. Maybe we're looking at doing a upgrade of an HVAC system, maybe in a physiotherapy or physical therapy area, a rooftop unit. Maybe we're looking at replacing it. Can we replace it with heat recovery, right? So here we have a situation where we're looking at a 60% efficient heat recovery unit. And we can also take into account then replacing that rooftop unit, tightening of the dampers, putting in better low leakage dampers, and the overall savings, which is around 70%. So RETScreen, again, and that's actually, that particular project is one of the low carb, is actually taken out of one of the low carbon archetypes we just looked at. This is an interesting story. I was doing a workshop like this, and if I had more time, I would open up RETScreen and go through this. I'm going to show you the result. But the story goes, I'm doing a workshop. Gentleman in the back of the room says, Steve, you're talking about this fancy tool called RETScreen. My contractor that's replacing the roof on the left wing of our long-term care home tells me that we could, he can accommodate, that roof will accommodate another 2 inches beyond what I've asked him to install. So nominally they were going to go with R10. This was 15 years ago now, right? He said, but he can do R20, and he's only going to charge me $1.20 a square foot to go the additional R10 on the roof. Can you analyze that with your fancy program called RETScreen? I said, absolutely, I can do that. So I did that. So I jumped into RETScreen and I put a quick boiler, put air conditioning in, did the building envelope, looked at just the roof going from R10 to R20, put in $12,000 as the cost on 10,000 square feet. Turns out that the simple payback was 8.6 years. And it would reduce carbon, right, in that situation by 5.4 tons of CO2. Well, he liked the carbon piece, but he said, well, you know what? That roof's going to be there for 20 years, right? So we said, that's probably reasonable. I said, well, tell you what, why don't we go back and dial in? I think I told him to go down to 80 cents a square foot because the chances are the contractor's sitting there with the insulation on the truck anyway, right? So I said, yeah, you're going to drop your payback down to about 5 years at 80 cents a square foot. He called him back. He said, can you do it for 80 cents a square foot? The guy goes, done. So there's energy management in the moment using a decision support tool like RETScreen, because I wouldn't have known off the top of my head how much that was going to save. I would have no idea. I did the calculation. If I had answered the question without doing the calculation, I probably would have given him the wrong answer, and that's not a good thing. All right. Today, many people are looking at going and replacing rooftop units, right? Moving into sort of natural gas-fired rooftop units, moving to heat pump fired unit or heat pump powered units. And RETScreen has the tools to do that too. You can take and you can build a hybrid system, right? Maybe you don't replace all the capacity, and this is something a lot of people are doing at home. Some are going full heat pumps. Some of them are putting hybrid system, gas and electric, right? Now, I know Kate's sitting here thinking, well, if you're on the, if you've got an oil-fired piece of equipment in a home in New Brunswick, it's a slam dunk to go to a heat pump, but it is, right? But here in Ontario, right, and maybe other provinces where we have gas availability, it's not necessarily a slam dunk to go to that heat pump quite yet. It is from a carbon perspective, but the challenge is we have to kind of balance the cost and the carbon piece. So RETScreen has the tools to do that. It allows me to actually configure a hybrid system, and actually even allows me to size the system. I'm not going to go into the details right now. If you want, I'd be happy to take you through this module. You can send me an email, say, Steve, show me how to look at my house and change to a heat pump from gas heating, right? And there's some pretty neat little tools in here to do that, right? It's a very obscure part of RETScreen. Even people that use RETScreen all the time, you are not aware of this tool. So if you're a longtime RETScreen user, make sure you take a look at the power, heating, cooling module and see how there's some examples in the template of how to use RETScreen to size up a residential, or even we've done it for small clinics, we've done it for fire halls, a small rooftop-based heat pump system. So neat little tools that maybe you weren't aware of. Looking at a variable speed drive on a fan or a pump, right? So maybe we're refitting that HVAC system, and we've got inlet guide vanes today. And maybe what we want to do is to look at the opportunity to put a drive on it. Most times that's going to happen anyway today, in my experience, but you can always justify that case using a tool like RETScreen. It just adds to the savings, and it's always good to be aware of those savings. RETScreen in feasibility, if we do the whole building, also allows you to create this picture of where all the energy is going. So, and when we're summarizing, we have the measures, all those measures. We can put many measures into an analysis in RETScreen, and we can pick and choose the ones we want to carry forward into sort of the project that we implement. So we're not bound to use all of them. We can pick the ones that make sense, gives us the financial result that we're after. We can eliminate the ones with a longer payback or the lower return and come up with a basket of opportunities that meet our financial criteria, that deliver a certain amount of carbon reduction, right? And we can do that life cycle costing on the financial side of it to develop, good indicators like net present value, benefit to cost ratio, internal rate of return. All those functions are in there. So, just to show you very quickly, I took a few years ago, I did a seminar like this where I said, what could you do with RETScreen on the renewable side? So looking at PV, So these were real projects. So I actually, if you take a look at them, you can, this is from BC, obviously, um, as a real project in a hospital, and I analyzed that with RETScreen, right? So they weren't done with RETScreen to begin with. Well, they might have been, but I wasn't aware of it. What I did was I took the case studies and said, hey, listen, I can use RETScreen to look at these just as a demonstration of what you could do, right? So I could calculate the energy, the carbon, the cost, and then ultimately the internal rate of return for each of these projects, right? Up in Flin Flon, looking recladding of the hospital, right, to in order to improve the facade look, but also putting a solar wall on there, which heats incoming air for makeup air into the building, right? So combining a sort of an architectural upgrade with an energy upgrade. And you can analyze that with RETScreen. In this case, they were using #2 oil boilers, which are particularly consumptive or emissive, I guess, on the carbon side of it. Even if you've got a geothermal heat pump system you're looking at, you can definitely analyze that in RETScreen as well. That actually uses the power heating cooling model that I looked at a bit earlier. If anybody's interested in these 3 projects, like I'd be happy to share the RETScreen file that I used on those just as examples. You could probably go through and find a project similar to it in the case study templates or the archetypes, but I'd be happy to share these particular ones. They're just based upon publicly available case studies that were out there. All right, so performance analysis. So we talked about feasibility, right? Feasibility is where you go, I'm going to take this, I'm going to change it to that. And the virtual energy analyzer is built around making as much of that available to you as possible. Performance analysis is about tracking improvement, right, and other changes in performance. I had an example years ago where we looked at a hospital. They had no idea what they'd saved through an economizer, but they also didn't realize that they'd lost a lot of the savings because when they maintained the economizer at some point in the future, after it was put in, they forgot to put it back into process properly, and for a couple of months they weren't getting any savings out of it. So good performance analysis will avoid that kind of thing. Kate's going to talk about a thing called a Q-sum. That's very much in her vocabulary. A Q-sum, in very simple terms, is just like a financial person would do. It's called the cumulative sum of the difference between your expected consumption and your actual consumption, right? And we use a performance model in behind that as a relationship between, say, energy and weather and clinical activity and people in the hospital, all those kinds of things. So we have a model which represents the performance of the building. We model what would happen, right? If we took an action, we model what would happen if we didn't take an action. We take the difference between that and what actually occurred, and then we sum the difference, right? And that's what we call a Q-sum. And it's a line that if it's going up, it means things are getting worse. If it's flat, it means we're holding the line. If it's turning downwards, it means things are have improved. It's like the trend in your energy performance. A financial person would take your budget, take your actual spend, do year to date or variance from budget, and then year to date variance from budget. The year to date or to date variance from budget is exactly what a Q-sum is in financial terms, right? But it's just an idea of getting an idea of how well you're doing compared to what you would have done in many cases without taking some action. So there's actually the Q-sum that I talked about before, where an economizer was installed. This was all done after the fact, and by doing this, we're able to show the folks from the hospital how much they'd saved. And then at one point, we discovered that all the savings went away, and it took them a while to figure it out. But they came back and said they serviced the economizer, but then they put it back into the flue, but they didn't open the valves which allow water to go through, which allows it to actually save energy, right? Displace heat somewhere else in the hospital, and that was a lost opportunity. What's the opportunity here is to actually monitor maybe weekly. So take readings weekly, and a lot of data is available to do that. RETScreen can work with daily data. Why wait until the end of the year to discover you made a mistake when you can't do anything? Catch it earlier. And Kate will talk about that one. So RETScreen actually is very adept at doing this. You know, you can basically start with a spreadsheet full of data, develop a performance model, we call it regression analysis, and then generate this thing called a Q-sum. And there is a whole series of videos. I think I narrate one, which is 15 videos. It goes through 3 to 4 minutes each, goes through all these steps on the RETScreen website. I also like to look at meter data, so I can connect RETScreen to many other sources. This is actually my own house, connected through a very simple monitoring system called Hydro, which is all part of the RETScreen Connect suite of connections between RETScreen and the outside world, right? So now we're connecting RETScreen to databases and physical monitoring equipment. Now it comes to life, right? And I actually monitor my own house with this tool. Right? I can do some beautiful graphs like the one on the top there on the right. I like it's a weekly graph. I can march through the weeks. I can overlay the weather. I can see Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I can compare weeks, and then I can do the whole year right in one glance. So that's every 15 minutes, right? Every row on, going down the page is 1 week, and every little pixel across is 15 minutes. So I can see the whole year in a glance on those two views. You can get to those two graphs once you've got the data in there, which might take you 10 minutes. You can get to those probably in about 2 minutes. So it's very good at allowing you to visualize what's happening. We found malfunctioning controls, right, in a building, right, by going down and looking at this. And until you look at it at this level, like a doctor uses things like EKGs to examine, performance of your heart. Well, I like to say the demand profile is the EKG for your building. It allows you to see things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. All that cycling, what is that? That's a malfunctioning compressor control, right? Here we have heating, cooling controls, right? When the temperatures in an office area were set up at the end of the afternoon this summer, the electric heat kicked in to drive the temperature up and drive the demand through the roof. They had no idea until we generated this graph what was going on. That led to a whole lot of recommissioning projects in that particular area of offices. We also look at gas data this way as well. And if you're going to be looking at, we get hourly gas data and start to analyze it. Here, the situation was we had, again, malfunctioning boiler controls that was actually bringing 2 and 3 boilers on, even in the warm months of the year when they really weren't necessary. But nobody really saw it when you're in the boiler room. You're not there long enough to see this, right? Unless you're really paying attention. This was an unattended plant, granted, not like in a hospital where you have a tended plant. But in those situations, you got to have eyes on it, and the data can breathe those eyes on that. And again, you can do a heat map for the gas data. And ultimately, if you're doing decarbonization, you want to know what your building load looks like, your heating load, right? How many BTU or how many thousands of BTU per hour you need at peak, how many you need on average, that's all necessary to size up those decarbonization strategies. Well, that gas data is one of the greatest sources of that, and RETScreen allows you to deal with it quite nicely. So that takes us on to what we call portfolio analysis. And in the portfolio analysis, we can take not just one building and either performance or feasibility or bench, we can take a whole collection of buildings and bring them together. And this is actually where Kate's going to take us here in a few minutes. She's going to take us to her portfolio and just show us what they've done in that portfolio. We can do benchmarking within the portfolio. I really like this. If you've got more than one building, this is a great little graph. So every little pair of dots on this graph will be the solid dot and the hollow dot. That represents one building. The solid dot represents where the building started. That's the base case before we did a feasibility analysis on it. The hollow dot represents where the building could get to, right? If we did all the measures, that is, we went to our proposed case, right? And that line through the center there represents in this case, we're benchmarking on emissions, the tons of CO2 per square meter of building area. So that's the benchmark. So the idea here is that we want to bring our buildings as close to the benchmark as possible, and ideally below the benchmark. That's the goal, the benchmark in this case. And what's interesting is any building that starts above the benchmark is red, any building that's below the benchmark to begin with is green. So at a glance, we can actually see where we sit today with respect to that. Well, I'm calling it a benchmark here, but it could be a target. Describe it as a target as well. That's the kind of thing you can do in RETScreen. So every one of those is an individual building. Underneath each of those dots is a feasibility analysis, and the red dot, the solid one, is the base case, right? The hollow dot is the proposed case. So basically what I looked at earlier on, base and proposed case, the way it is, the way we want it to be, that can be all summarized out here at a portfolio level for multiple buildings. Now, some of you may only have one building, so it's really maybe not relevant. But there's also a custom dashboard feature here where we can use this to report out in a very customized fashion. So you can build a dashboard with multiple pages and books, in fact, with all the different graphs that you might have within the software. And there are a lot of graphs. I'm not going to go into it right now, but there's just a ton of graphs. And again, e-learning video, let's see how we do this. Click on that and we go to I think it's a 20-minute video on how to use the custom dashboard feature within RETScreen. So lots of support to be able to do this. If you've got data in Portfolio Manager, right? You click one button on the front screen of Portfolio Manager. It's on the left-hand side. It says, export my entire portfolio to a spreadsheet. You click that. You take that spreadsheet. You go to RETScreen. You go and say, I want to create a new portfolio. It says Portfolio Manager button. You click that. RETScreen says, where's your file from Portfolio Manager? Where do you want me to put the result? And how do you want me to deal with dates? That's 3 questions. You answer them. And the next thing you know, all your data is in the portfolio tool within RETScreen, and you can go straight to things like benchmarking right away. Even more importantly, once you get the data in there, Portfolio Manager looks at your data on a year-over-year basis largely. You do get the graphs of the monthly consumption, but RETScreen has that amazing performance analysis facility where you can take that monthly data and dig even deeper with analytics. And that's what Kate is going to talk to us about right now. So Kate, I know you didn't know exactly when I was going to do this, but I said I was going to be about an hour in, and I think I'm about an hour in.
You're pretty
So
close.
yeah. So let's see what you have done. And Kate, you're going to tell us a little bit about what you've got some time here. So take your time and tell us the context. Like, tell us what you're doing in New Brunswick, how you're approaching it. I know you're using ISO 50001, and then how does RETScreen fit in to all of that, and Portfolio Manager for that matter. Please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, I think you need to stop sharing before I can share.
Do I? Okay, there we go.
Okay, so I will share my screen. I think we're good. Perfect. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. There was a short introduction, and my name is Kate Butler. I'm with Service New Brunswick Health Services, looking after energy management for the province. Just so you're aware, as I go through some of this stuff today, I'm going to highlight a Horizon Health Network. There are 2 regional health authorities in the province. We've been working with Horizon Health Network for the good part of a decade now. And we've recently actually hired a new energy manager to do the same type of a program and support for Vitality Health Network. So we are doing this province-wide, and whatever we're going to talk about with Horizon Health and using those examples, we're going to actually repeat because we know that it works and it's provided good value to the health authorities in the province when it came to energy reduction and greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So just to let you know that it can be done with multiple facilities, and there is a good process. And even though it may seem overwhelming, we've been implementing Portfolio Manager and RETScreen with Horizon Health. They currently operate over 100 facilities. We are just in the business of looking at the ones that they actually own. So that's about 12 hospitals and 29 healthcare facilities, $21 million annual energy spend, 204 million equivalent kilowatt hours, and 44,000 equivalent tons of GHG emissions annually. So it's a pretty good portfolio. You know, our mission every single day is to how do we support Horizon Health, their facilities team, to reduce their energy, thus reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So we have been working with Horizon Health. I should actually, there. Can you guys see those slides? Is that working?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So we do apply that plan, do, check, act approach that Stephen mentioned initially in today's session. We apply it to people, technology, and information, and we have lots of tools in our toolbox. So recognizing how important assessing the current situation is, those goals and targets, how you implement projects, and you continually reviewing and checking them. We have 2 key tools that we use. Portfolio Manager is our foundation. And then, as Stephen just mentioned, we can migrate data from Portfolio Manager, which we typically do quarterly, over to RETScreen so that we can analyze that data in 12 of the hospitals for Horizon. We don't have all 41 facilities right now in our portfolio, just the 12 hospitals. I say we do it quarterly. There are cases when we're really interested in a project that we will actually do that monthly. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. I think what the important part is that we've kind of integrated everything together so that we have that foundation. We have good quality data on a monthly basis, and then we can use that with the other tools to engage staff, to measure and verify, and just really get a really good understanding of our energy. That being said, that really good understanding of our energy and where we've been and where we are today has been extremely successful. So I thought I'd be amiss if I didn't toot the horn for Horizon, and recognizing that this is just one health authority in the province. We've been successful over 10 years. As a matter of fact, we've been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from Horizon by 70,000 equivalent tons of carbon dioxide, which is about 21,500 cars off the road. So from some of you participating today from larger centers, this may not feel like a lot to you, but when we look at the amount of energy, which is 317 million equivalent kilowatt hours in reduction, that's about 10,000 New Brunswick homes heated and operated. There's only about 275,000 homes in New Brunswick. So when you put it in that perspective, they've had a lot of success, and it really is taking a chunk out from the entire province. So we know we have good success. These numbers are real. They're real because we have the tools and the data that we can actually use industry standards and best practices to actually put this information out there to say we are seeing reduction. It's not because it was a warm winter or a warm summer or a cooler summer. We have information and we have the best practices like Portfolio Manager and RETScreen that can actually put this information back out there that you can actually say this is good quality data and these are true results. That's really important for us. So we do use Energy Star Portfolio Manager as that foundation. It really gives us a good benchmark for our buildings. We love the Energy Star score. It's really good for communicating and engaging staff that aren't as technically inclined when it comes to facilities and how a building operates. So we have, a group of key people who use the Portfolio Manager. They can see the annual, the 12-month rolling data. They can view their bills on month-to-month basis. They can validate those energy bills. We can take it to a next step to be certified. That's probably for another day, but basically that means that your Energy Star score is 75 or above and you're not reaching that score at the detriment of the building. So you're meeting your standards and codes. We use it for engagement, for facility staff, so they know how to access their bills, how to see their month-to-month data. This graphic here is, the peaks and valleys, but making energy visible so they can see their bills. But it's not enough when you look at Portfolio Manager to actually measure and validate some of the savings that you might see from an energy project or day-to-day operations that have been optimized. And that's really where the RETScreen comes in. But what's key is that the same data from Portfolio Manager is migrated into RETScreen. So we know we have good quality monthly billing data to start with. And that allows us, at the end of the day to be able to report back. So what I thought was, just looking at how we do things, and I've touched on this quite a bit, is we have our Portfolio Manager. It is our foundation. We use that for our benchmarks. It does get updated monthly. And I think that's been really a key for us moving forward is we have up-to-date accurate data. The data comes from the utilities, whether it's through the web services feature and or from the utility directly, where they will send us, at the first of the month, all the energy data in a preset format, an Excel spreadsheet that's easily uploaded to Portfolio Manager. We can go in and validate that data, look for gaps. We make energy visible, like I said, so we can see if we have any gaps in the data, and it's easy to communicate. Then we can migrate that data over to RETScreen, which really allows us to, with that acquired data, to analyze the data and then take action if required. And those are our 3 A's that we call them, and they're really important for us when we're trying to reduce energy and or if we're trying to identify where we're seeing slippage or where energy for a reason that you don't know is starting to migrate in the upward direction. So it can be flags in that way too. And again, it's data that came from the Portfolio Manager. It's quality and it's consistent, and we can use it in a number of different ways. And then at the end of the day, we can use the QSUM, we can use the reports function or the dashboards function of RETScreen to actually communicate that data out to the people that are in the facilities and actually have the ability to make a difference.
So in a way, what you're saying is that RETScreen really just closes that loop and makes that final connection.
It closes the loop, and it fits in with our ISO 50001 process and the guidelines for that. So it really does close the loop. Yes, for sure. So I think, can you see my RETScreen file now?
We can.
Okay. I'm not used to presenting on Zoom. So just kind of keeping in the spirit with what Stephen promised you is I'm just going to walk through some of our files that we actually have in RETScreen. We do, for Horizon Health, have all 12 other hospitals in a portfolio. So what you can see here are all the facilities, we get their facility size, what type of analysis we've done, and then we can pick and choose which sites we want to go into. But at the end of the day, because they're in a portfolio, we can actually roll all that up and see reports and dashboards, which will show us all of our sites at one time. So I'm going to just jump into Upper River Valley Hospital. It's in Waterville, New Brunswick. It's about 230,000 square feet. It's one of the most newer hospitals, built in 2007. And we have had a lot of projects happen at that site. So built in 2007, it was built to LEED Silver. New construction, and around 2014, 2015, we recognized that of the Horizon 12 hospitals, it was one of the worst performing hospitals. So it kind of raised a flag because we had that data in Portfolio Manager, we saw that benchmark, and we went to site to see, you know, what's happening, have a discussion. We did an energy audit. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to get started with, I think this one here. So you can see, there it is. What came to light was that we had a lot of systems at Upper River Valley Hospital in manual. So the first thing we looked at was maybe we could do a recommissioning project. So we did do a recommissioning project, and this is what you call the QSUM. So the first thing when you do the QSUM is you have your regression analysis, which for us regressed quite nicely. It was 0.185. We took our baseline year as 2017, 2018 prior to doing the recommissioning process. And you can see this is our baseline year, and it's quite flat, which is what you expect to see. And then the QSUM, what you always want to see is this downward. And the downward means that you're actually reducing your energy. So we completed our recommissioning process in the early spring of 2018, and we immediately started to see a decline in our energy consumption. This is just it says oil and wood. The wood did not come online until 2022. So it's basically our heating fuel QSUM. So we did see that coming down. What you quickly notice for your healthcare professionals is that we did see a reduction. It's not only did a flat line, it started to actually increase a bit in early 2020. So we can pinpoint the date. I think it was February 16th, 2020, Upper River Valley went into 24/7 fresh air mode. That was the immediate reaction to worries and uncertainty about COVID much earlier than most of the public is aware. And we started to see that increase. Once we started to see that increase and we started to get a better idea of infection prevention control and how to operate, isolation rooms were put in place so that we weren't implementing these measures hospital-wide 24/7 with 100% fresh air. We started to see that decline again, and it came back online. So the other thing that we recognize in Upper River Valley Hospital is that they were an oil hospital. So their physical plant, they had 3 oil boilers, and that's how we produce our steam, sterilization, hot water, heating systems at that hospital. So we had also taken quite a few years to develop a study, and moving forward, how are we going to remove that oil from the site? And at the end of the day, we actually had a pellet boiler installed. And it was commissioned in December 2022, and that biomass boiler started up. If you looked at Portfolio Manager, you would not have seen this increase over those months because Portfolio Manager doesn't weather normalize for one, and it's not really differentiating quick enough when you look at a whole year's worth of data. But because we had this regression and we had the QSUM here, and we migrated that data over, we could within months, well, actually within 1 month, but we could start to see that slope come right back up with the biomass boiler. And it was a concern to us. But initially, you know, everyone was patting themselves on the back when that pellet boiler was commissioned. And so it was certainly a concern, and it led us to come back to site and start asking questions. You know, the pellet boiler manufacturer wanted to see great success. You know, our consultant who had designed the system wanted to see great success. Upper River Valley facilities team wanted to see great success. And without this type of a tool, we may not have noticed this beyond 12 months. So because we were able to see the Q-sum right away, we were able to start seeing that energy go up and start asking questions. And those questions took a lot of work to dive down, but because we could see this and we were able to say, we're talking about, $30,000, $40,000 of oil, not to mention the emissions, it really kind of put that focus on the facilities team, on the chief engineer on site. And it was basically an issue with the supply temperature from the pellet boiler being too low. And so the oil boiler was taking the lead a lot of the time, which is not what the intention was. The intention was that the pellet boiler was the lead for the system, and we only used oil when it was required. So we took that action and we could start to see it come back down. We also had some other issues with the pellet boiler. The auger failed. That took a little bit of time. So you can see we saw that the energy kind of flatlined again and came back down again. At the very end here, you can see in October where we had another issue with the pellet boiler. And the energy started to go back up again. That issue has also been resolved. That was, again, another auger issue. So with all the auger issues that we were having, they took it down in October when it failed again. They were having it was almost like tar, like in the auger, and it was just hard. So they revamped on site what those issues were, and they revamped it so that all the auger was inside the building. There was nothing outside the building. They put a slope on it, and we haven't had an issue since, which is good. But because we were able to interact with them and give them real data, they actually, instead of saying, well, the building's operating fine, everyone's getting heat, there hasn't been any complaints, that's usually what drives facility staff to take action in a hospital. So we had to give them the information so that they could take action in the hospital. And usually it's a Q-sum or an information from RETScreen. So I'm just going to show you an email that had gone out early on that we were able to really dive down into the information and show when the oil boiler was running, when the pellet boiler was running, and we gave them some really good information to say, here's where the concerns are. Why is the oil boiler running? When we really were expecting the pellet boiler. So it gave them enough information so that chief engineer and the building operators could go into the system and start looking at the oil boiler. And when you put things in perspective like this, you actually tend to get action because they want that feedback. They want to know that, we've invested in this pellet boiler and we're actually making the best of it that we can. So interestingly enough, what else came out of this action was the fact that we had done that recommissioning project. Oh, here's just another one where we just re-baseline it so you can actually see the actual impact of the auger. We had done that recommissioning project, then we brought the pellet boiler back on, but we're not getting the same angle on the line of the decreasing. So you can see we've kind of had, I guess it's not as steep of a line anymore. So we would have expected there's a little bit of trade-off, recognizing that your pellet boiler is not as efficient. And that you've got a different type of fuel that, we're going to lose a little bit of steepness, but we thought we're not as steep as we'd like to be. We would like to somehow, come back to this type of steepness. So we have just started another recommissioning project because we're able to use this data to say we can do better. And so we are actually just going back to the recommissioning project, and we're going to start from scratch again using in-house to see, what have we've seen slip historically. So that's been really beneficial to us. And I think, aside from the fact that there's so much power in RETScreen and it can make many different uses that Stephen showed you today, actually just looking at your site on a monthly basis, there's so much valuable information for us that you can feed back to the sites that allow them to analyze that data and take some action.
Okay, you actually showed me electricity one where it's starting to taper, like the slope is starting to gradually.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's probably
this one there. No,
there we
there
go.
It is,
Yeah,
there.
this is actually a really good one for the recommissioning because it's just the electricity.
So when you did the recommissioning, you can see it turned down a couple of instances steeper. You saw the impact of COVID, but now you're starting to see it taper off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that says when we often get the question, how often do you do recommissioning? Well, you can use this to determine the return for doing it at some point. But once it goes flat, you're basically back to the way you were.
And
you
the electricity is pretty flat.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So there's
Right.
yeah, like it's amazing how a QSUM or being visual can actually build a case for you almost instantly. And that's what this one does for us, for sure.
Yeah, I had one person once it was a CFO once described the QSUM as an indisputable visual of the results. And another person described it as like it's standing there waving at you, say, look at me, look at me.
It's true. It's true. I don't know how much time I have, so I'm going to jump over to another healthcare facility. It's Charlotte County Hospital.
Sure.
It's a small site. It's 87,000 square feet. And what I really wanted to show you was this piece right here. So there was a couple of issues that were happening at Charlotte County Hospital, but with the information that we were putting out there, getting a lot of engagement with their staff and them understanding the information that we were sending to them beyond portfolio manager, but them having access to QSUMs and information quicker, I guess, would probably be a way to put it, instead of like the 12-month, annual data, but they can see it month to month. They can see the weather normalization. What we started to see just last summer, it was a very humid spring and a very hot spring in St. Stephen, temperatures and humidity like we've never seen before. But this is weather normalized, and we started to see an increase. And because we were putting this information out there and just asking the questions, one of the building operators took it upon herself to start going into the system. And what she saw was that there was a lot of cooling being called for at night, more so than she would have ever expected, more so than she would have thought during the day. So that was the first flag for her. So when she was on night shift, she started walking around the hospital to see what was going on. And what she noticed was in many nursing units at the station, there were windows, and the windows were all open at night. And she asked the question, like, why do you have the windows open? And they're like, well, we're freezing. So, through a lot of discussion, and what happened was the realization that, during the day, the nurses are walking around a lot. So yeah, they're getting warm, and we need those set points on our cooling system. But at night, they spend a lot more time sitting at the nursing station, so they weren't as hot. So even though the set point wasn't really adjusting well between the daytime and the evening activities, the nurses just took it upon themselves to open the window. And so they open the window, and so which is actually warming up the space. And so now the cooling system at that set point was actually working more than it had to. And really, it was just a set point adjustment that had to happen in the scheduling to meet those nurses, thermal comfort levels. So noticing that it was going up, we had all that activity, engaged with the nurses, worked with them, tweaked that schedule for nighttime, and we saw it come back down. And this, again, I can't remember what this is. So I should have given you a disclaimer that the person who should be doing this today is on vacation. And he is much more versed on all of this. I should know what this is, because he told me not. I'll be honest, I can't remember what it is, but we can see that issue was also adjusted almost instantly. But
yeah,
I think
you're back on so over here you had, I look in the labels or the events, it's those leak in the condensate line. Once that got fixed, you headed downwards, right? And then you had the blip because of the cooling, headed downwards, another blip, but back. So now you're on that downward trend at the end.
Now we're back on if we can take out that blip, we've got a pretty good line going here.
Everything's going down. Yeah.
And the line stats are really important. The slope of that line, how long that line's been moving for. And it's the QSUM that really notified our energy manager of the issue with the condensate. We had a really good regression. We had a little bit of a decrease, and then we saw this huge increase happening. And at first they thought the pumps were down, then they realized there was a leak. And then we actually had to wait until the spring, because I had to dig up the soil to get at the leak in the condensate line. So this site provides steam to an adjacent nursing home, and that's where the condensate wasn't coming back. The pump was broken, and then there was a leak. And we could see this really increase. And it's a small scale, like this is 0 gigajoules, 500, 1,000. I don't know how well you can see that on your screen, but that's quite the incline.
Well, that's still
$15,000. We're on our way back down.
That's still $15,000 at $10 a gigajoule, so that's not insignificant.
Yeah,
And
we're at about $18, $19 a
yeah,
gigajoule for
it's
natural
like
gas.
RETScreen can even see underground leaks.
Yeah,
In
they
a
can see
sense,
underground
if you
leaks.
know how to use it, right?
Yeah,
X-ray vision.
yeah. And in the whole scheme of things, this, when you see it in Portfolio Manager and it's 1 or 2%, you don't even realize that is something you should be investigating. When you put it in this type of a format with the QSUM and you see it almost instantly going up, any up needs to be investigated for sure. And that's been the power for us, and how we're going to continue to use this tool to engage and take action quicker. So you can analyze that information and take it a lot quicker than you can with Portfolio Manager. Portfolio Manager has its place, absolutely, and we make very good use of it, encouraging staff to take their Energy Star score and continue to make it better. But when you start looking at these larger sites, or these I guess more comprehensive sites with a lot of diverse uses, different systems, RETScreen is the tool that you need to use to make a difference. And I can't express enough how powerful the QSUM is. Graphics every single day will tell a story rather than me talking or trying to show a word. The other thing I was going to show you too is that we can take all this data and we can make reports. I know that Brent has like some cost data in here, so he's got an annual bar graph, so you can see the cost over the years. It doesn't necessarily take into account some of the rate increases that we've seen, but you can pull all that stuff together graphically however you want and need it. Like the slicing and dicing power of it is astronomical. And again, I think I don't even know how powerful this tool is, because I still just stick to the basics of it. And I know, like our energy managers, we've got Brent for Horizon and now Nick for Vitalite. They're going to learn to use this even more and keep adding their abilities to make this a powerful tool for sure.
Well,
I think there's
great,
one
Kate.
other, but pardon me?
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, do you have one more quick one?
I think you wanted me to show, was it the
Well, you wanted to do the, well, yeah, actually,
Oh,
if you go to the, go to the portfolio and go to the
to
dashboard.
the
That's
dashboard. So here's
yeah,
what I'm
so
talking about, slice and dicing and rolling it all up. So when you have multiple sites, you can, at any given time, based on what your need is, you can create your performance analysis and you can show it per site. So here, since 2012, 2013, we can see, the red is St. John Regional Hospital. That's our largest hospital. So it makes sense that it's a huge chunk of the pie, but you can actually see where all your emissions are coming from. And I think
and
whatever you can dream of for a dashboard, you can make happen.
exactly, and you
Yeah.
can put this into a kiosk, put it in an elevator too. I've seen people do that. But and actually, one neat feature here is that it's detected at the portfolio view. One of your files underneath has changed. So if you click the little refresh button up on the toolbar at the top there, it'll actually go out and check the data and update the reports for you. So your reports don't get out of date. So it's kind of watching things for you. So
And I
there you
know
go.
that some of the provinces have reporting policies and mandates that they have to do in their healthcare facilities. We don't have that type of a mandate, but we do it anyway. So we have an annual report and we pull this type of information right out of RETScreen. It makes our life so much easier than having Excel files that you need to update that really have a little bit of hesitation when it comes to the quality of the data. They're so easy to make changes to, and errors. RETScreen, it's quality data, and it's consistent and it's validated data, and it has a little bit more credibility. So
That's
I think
amazing, Kate.
that was
Thank
my
you
wrap
very much. For somebody that didn't use it all the time, but when you said Brent, no, you did a great job. So thank you. I
up.
really appreciate that. And I always say every building, every facility needs a QSUM, and you clearly validated that so
The
far.
QSUM, yeah.
So I can present the theory, but you're presenting the real practice. So,
Yeah.
so you'll need to stop sharing so I can just wrap
Mm.
us up here. There we go. So, all right. Thanks, Kate. Feel free to leave your camera on if you want. There we go. Okay, everybody can see that, right? Yeah, I think so. Just there. Yeah. Okay, good. So thanks again for that. As part of the portfolio analysis tool in RETScreen, there's also a new feature called the Net Zero Planner. And this kind of brings together the idea of multiple buildings, a portfolio, with the idea of the archetypes, which can either be low carbon or low energy or both. Right. So the Net Zero Planner allows you to assemble a portfolio of archetypical buildings, if I can get that right, and then specify some decision-making points in assembling a net zero plan for that portfolio, where it deals with things like, okay, you consider electric boilers, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, how much carbon reduction or how much of the energy supplied you're going to leave in the peak load system, which would this be natural gas, which isn't going to reduce carbon. You know, how you deal with what we call the off-site and on-site renewables, right? So there's lots of, and how you pick your baselines. So there's lots of features we can use here to really sort of tailor a portfolio to a specific purpose, and then to develop a net zero plan, which in summary, I mean, so here we see the portfolio of buildings, which are built out of those archetypes. And here we see the net zero plan in summary, which says, okay, we start out here, we bring in 2000, we bring that to 2022, right? Then we look at a greening of the electricity grid, if that's one of our options, accepting that that could happen, right? Then we have energy efficiency measures in the building, which reduce carbon. That's a big one, right? Those energy efficiency measures. Forget about well, in this case, the electrification of the heating system is actually small compared to what efficiency can contribute. But it's only when you use a tool like RETScreen where you'll be able to look at that upfront and determine what are the right actions for you to take. You know, on-site renewables, off-site renewables, and carbon offsets to get yourself to net zero. So if you want more information about that, if you remember, I showed you there's a video, right? So when you can go to RETScreen's YouTube channel, and one of the first videos on the channel right now is Kevin Bork talking about the net zero plan in RETScreen. It's about an hour and a half. You can start and stop it. You can follow him through the examples in there. So just to finish off, you know, I think we made the case pretty good. You know, Kate, you definitely made the case that, you know, everybody needs a QSUM, because you're not going to be able to see with other tools the kinds of things that the analytics in RETScreen, the QSUM specifically allows you to see. But there's many things you can do in RETScreen, right? We haven't even touched, you know, on what we can do with the feasibility. You've just focused on the performance piece, which is great, but there are lots of other bits and pieces in there as well. Years ago, I did a seminar with JJ Knott, right, who many of you probably know. And he said, well, what are the reasons I should use RETScreen? Well, simplification, right? All the databases and costs and the things that are in there, it simplifies getting to it. One of the developers years ago of RETScreen said it's one step better than the back of an envelope calculation, maybe 2 or 3 steps better, right? You know, and ultimately that's what we want here, is we want a tool that's going to help us, you know, take those first few steps and really be able to make better decisions. Standardization, right? So I don't have to worry about getting, Kate, you talked about reporting, right? Making sure your reports are credible using the right factors. Standardization. Persuasion, being able to present things. Kate, you presented very persuasively how that QSUM can get to the root cause of a problem. But these are progress indicators in the portfolio dashboard tool, right? Interoperability, the fact that RETScreen now connects to many different sources of information. You know, you did a great job of showing how it connects Portfolio Manager. I use it for my house, but there are many other ways to connect RETScreen now to get data into it to make it easier, right? Ultimately, I spend a lot of time getting data into tools, but it's getting easier and easier with RETScreen these days. So finally, everyone here who hasn't got a license will receive a 30-day license. Until you receive it, just go download RETScreen right now and start to play with it. Get the license, you'll have it fully blown for 30 days, and you can make the purchase decision beyond that. And I think, Autumn, you can jump back in here if you want. Autumn's going to send out an evaluation. How did we do today? Was this useful to you? But one of the questions on that evaluation is going to be, do you want to be entered into the draw for a few hours of coaching and support, right? So we're going to draw a couple people, and then, you know, that way some of you can go forward and use RETScreen. Ideally, people that haven't used it before, maybe we can get you to use it. So happy to provide that, love to provide that. But, you know, even if you don't win the draw, send me an email if you have a question. I always like to answer those questions. And hopefully I can learn from your questions. You can learn from my answers if I get the answers for you. And we all win that way. So that is the help desk for today. So Autumn, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate you guys coming in today and giving this awesome presentation. I just added the link to the survey in the chat where everyone can there's a question at the end. Add your email if you'd like to enter the draw for the free coaching session. You can also email Stephen or myself. I'll put my email in the chat. And if you missed the link for whatever reason, I will be sending it along with the webinar recording probably in the next day or so. I think there was maybe one question here in the chat. I think we did go a little past 10:30 already, but that's okay. If anyone has any other questions, please put them in the Q&A now. Kate, one of our attendees, Robert, just asked, does New Brunswick Health contribute resources to assist with analysis?
So I guess the answer is yes, because that would be us. So the way it's set up in New Brunswick is that the energy managers sit with actually Service New Brunswick. So Service New Brunswick is a crown corporation in the province, and we provide non-clinical services to healthcare. So clinical engineering, laundry, and actually energy management as well. So all this analysis that happens and the energy manager support is actually, yes, provided by government and not necessarily by the RHAs, but the RHAs are the ones who do all the work, like no question. We can just guide them, provide them information, lead them, support them however we can. And that's our role, but it actually is those healthcare facilities, those people with the feet on the ground that are putting their hands up and saying, yes, we want to take action. I don't know if that's quite the answer I'm looking for.
Sounded great to me.
Yeah, and if Robert, if your question was about getting help, now you're talking about at NSH. I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's Nova Scotia Health. I don't know.
Oh yes, it's Robert Barse. I see that now. Hi, Robert.
Oh, okay. So if you want help, sort of outside of maybe what Kate was talking about, that's where, you know, send me an email or put your name in the draw for sure. Right? We'll definitely try to help you. But RETScreen also is really good at providing support and help as well. They actually have, you've worked with the folks at RETScreen too, Kate. They help to set up portfolios and things like that.
Yeah, Keith has been fabulous. He helped us get started. And RKN, right? They're always there for questions, even, you know, the migration from portfolio over to RETScreen. I can't speak well enough of how helpful they've all been.
Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but if anyone has questions after the fact, you're welcome to reach out to Stephen or myself. Thanks, Wade. Wade said it was a good presentation. I think so too. As I said, I'll be sending out the webinar recording, and thank you again, Stephen and Kate, for joining us today. It was great having you. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yes. Thank you, Kate. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Autumn, for all the great support. We went seamlessly.
All right, awesome. All right, and thanks for everyone who attended today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.